Well, we finally heard from LSU head football coach Brian Kelly, the first time that we heard from him in an official press conference setting since he was named the head coach at LSU. So a lot to dissect there. 2 separate days. He talked about the defense. I want to hone in on what he had to say about the defense. We'll get on into all of that. We'll hear Matt House's introduction as defensive coordinator and he and Brian Kelly's vision for what this defensive scheme will look like in this season. All of that and more in the Locked On LSU podcast.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And today's episode of Locked On LSU is brought to you by Run Your Pool. March Madness is here, and Run Your Pool has a better way to create your bracket. RunYourPool.com, the premier sports pool hosting service. My name is Caroline Fenton, and I am your host, as I am every day. I am an LSU alum. I'm a diehard LSU fan, and I am now a sports talk radio host in Nashville, Tennessee for ESPN 1025 The Game. You can follow me on Twitter at Caroline Fenton1. I post, all sorts of things, podcast updates, my thoughts on LSU athletics throughout the week, and also just mod podge of everything going on in the sports world. You can also follow Locked On LSU's Twitter at Locked On LSU for more podcast information. And also make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Locked On LSU, so you'll get notified as soon as those videos dropped on YouTube. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you like to listen. But if you want to take a look at the video aspect, you can check it out on YouTube as well. But let's get into it. First time we've heard from Brian Kelly since he was announced as the head coach of LSU. The first time we've been able to hear from his defensive coaching staff. Heard from Matt House, the new defensive coordinator, for the first time. And we heard from Brian Kelly about exactly what it was that drew him to whatever coaches it was to name to his coaching staff. And a big part of the theme of the day breaking down the defense. And I'll break it down the offensive press conference tomorrow. So make sure to tune in to Locked On LSU tomorrow. That'll drop on Wednesday morning. But the big theme for the defensive side of things is experience, winning, ability to recruit, motivate, and develop players. He said that was the biggest goal for this coaching staff. Now, Matt House, named the defensive coordinator, obviously is going to be, the figurehead of this LSU defense. So here is what Brian Kelly had to say about naming Matt House as the defensive coordinator. And I want to preface all of this by saying I'm going to get on Brian Kelly where I see fit. I'm not going to necessarily take it easy on him. I'm going to give him credit where I think credit is due. And I'm also kind of going to be a little bit tough on him whenever I feel like I'm allowed to be. And I preface this by saying, I'm not a parent, but I can only imagine that when the day comes that I am a parent, that if there's somebody that's going to take care of my children, whether that's a teacher or a babysitter, whatever it may be, I'm going to be tough on him now. And I'm going to grill him. I'm going to ask him the hard questions. Now, I don't want to say that LSU football is like a child to me, even though that, I don't know if the shoe fits. But, when you love something, you're going to be critical about it. When you love something, you want to make sure that it's in the right hands. And that's exactly what I want to do here. I'm going to be tough on Brian Kelly, not just today, but also throughout the rest of this football season. And it's all out of love. It's all out of love because he is the captain of the ship of what I love so dearly and what I know all of you listeners, I know it's what you love as well. So I'm going to be tough on him, but this is what he had to say about naming Matt House defensive coordinator.
Really drew me to Matt was coordinator experience. Here's a man who has multiple coordinator roles at three different schools in particular, but more importantly in the SEC. And having experience in the SEC as a coordinator was certainly something that I was looking for. Matt's coached all the positions as well. And as a former defensive coach myself and a Division II head coach, I can appreciate somebody that's had to coach all those positions, because I've had to have that on my agenda as well. So he's coached the positions. He can fix the defense if it needs to get fixed, which it's never going to need to get fixed, right, man? We know that already. And he's won at the highest level. He's won a Super Bowl. So he's a winning football coach and a great teacher, great communicator. And so that's what really drew me to Matt.
Okay, a few things here that I want to break down. So first and foremost, Brian Kelly cites experience, especially SEC experience, coordinator experience, and winning at the highest level. Now, I don't want to nitpick here, but I'm going to. Like I said, this is my child, and Brian Kelly is caring for it. He cites SEC experience. Now, Matt House and coordinator experience. Matt House has 2 seasons of experience as a defensive coordinator in the SEC, and that was with Kentucky. Now, I understand that SEC experience is SEC experience, but it was with a team that has expectations lower than LSU. It was for a team that for one of 2 of those years had an incredibly underwhelming record. Didn't have a lot to show for his experience at defensive coordinator, for lack of a better word. He's a defensive coordinator at Kentucky from 2017 to 2018. 2017, Kentucky went 4-4 in the SEC. Okay, like nothing exciting, nothing that I want to write home about. But now to Matt House's defense, that 2018 season, that Kentucky defense was electric. Like it was the best defense in a very, very long time at Kentucky. They went 5-3 in the SEC, 10-3 overall. And if I can be totally honest with you, going 10-3 this year, if you're LSU football, like I don't mind that. A 10-3 season, I'm not going to stick my nose up at that. So if that's going to be the same kind of success that's going to be mimicked at LSU, like that for a first-year head coach, I'll take it. Okay, I'll take it. That Kentucky defense took huge leaps and bounds that year. In 2017, Kentucky had 367 points against, and in 2018, 219 points against. So about 150-point swing there. In 2017, the Kentucky defense had 29 sacks. In 2018, the team had 38. So in just the course of a season, in Matt House's tenure as the Kentucky defensive coordinator, I mean, that defense really took a huge step up. So, I mean, I critique Brian Kelly's use of the word SEC coordinator experience because Matt House just doesn't have a ton of it. But what we've seen is some turnover from the year 2017 to the year 2018. I mean, that Kentucky defense really did improve. So I have to give him credit for that. But as soon as I give credit, I take some away. Mark Stoops was a defensive coordinator at Florida State. He inherited the 108th nationally in total defense, turned it into the number 2 ranked defense just 3 years later. Okay, Mark Stoops is a proven defensive coach. Mark Stoops is a defensive guy. So how much can we really attribute that Kentucky defense, that turnover from 2017 to 2018, completely to Matt House? Now, I understand that Mark Stoops has been the coach at Kentucky for a very long time. So you may say, okay, why were they not, the defense wasn't great in Matt House's first year and so much better in the second year? I mean, Matt House has got to be the difference. I mean, yeah, you could attribute that turnover, part of it, to Matt House. You could attribute that improvement into 2018 to Mark Stoops, someone who has proven to improve defenses. We saw it at Florida State. You can also attribute it to Josh Allen. Not the Josh Allen that you're thinking of, not the Buffalo Bills Josh Allen, but outside linebacker, pass rusher Josh Allen was on that team in 2018. He was the 7th overall pick, current Jacksonville Jaguars pass rusher. He had 10.5 sacks in his first rookie year in Jacksonville, 7.5 this year. I mean, the guy is a stud. He was a certified first-round pick. A top 10 pick in that year's draft. So I have a hard time saying that Matt House was completely the difference and the improvement for Kentucky's defense in that year, because I think that there's a lot of factors. Not saying that he wasn't part of the formula, because I'm sure that he was. He was the defensive coordinator, for crying out loud. But I'm not all of a sudden just going to, sing his praises and going to say that he has certified winning experience and coordinator experience in the SEC when we really just don't have enough of a sample size of that. I mean, what we've seen from him at Kentucky is solid. It's fine. But it's nothing that I would be willing to say, man, this defense is in good hands just based off of that Kentucky experience alone. Now, this defense may be in great hands. It's just what we know and what Brian Kelly cited as the reason why he was interested in Matt House leading this defense. I don't know if I'm completely there. And another caveat to that as well, I'm going to be nitpicky here because that's my job. Brian Kelly mentioned, he has experienced winning at the highest level, which is true. I mean, Matt House won a Super Bowl with the Kansas City Chiefs, and he got back to the Super Bowl the year after. I mean, yes, that is winning a Super Bowl in the National Football League. That is winning at the highest level. But, can we be honest here? The Kansas City Chiefs did not win that Super Bowl because of anything that they did on defense. I mean, Kansas City had the 14th ranked defense in the NFL. If the Kansas City Chiefs didn't have an elite offense and didn't have the best quarterback in the league at the time, they would not be winning any sort of Super Bowls with the 14th ranked defense. I mean, if you look at Super Bowl winners of the past, I mean, look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last year. I mean, that was a solid defense. Look at the Los Angeles Rams this past year. The best player in the NFL in Aaron Donald plays on that defense. So, don't tell me that the Kansas City Chiefs won because of any heroics that Matt House did with the Kansas City Chiefs defense. They did not win that Super Bowl because of the defense. It was middle of the road. It was the 14th ranked defense in the NFL. It's nothing special. But also to that point, Matt House has been around winners. He has experienced what it's like to win at the most elite level in football. Even if it was nothing that he did necessarily, even if it was none of his X's and O's or any of his heroics on the field that won that Super Bowl, he's been around winners and he's learned from Andy Reid, a well-respected coach in the league, and he's been around a ton of talent. He's been around Super Bowl caliber talent. So I do have to give him that just having that experience and knowing what it is like to win at the highest level is invaluable. It's just I don't want his Super Bowl with Kansas City to be touted as some sort of, extreme feather in his cap of proven track record of winning, when that defense absolutely did not measure up to the caliber of the offense of that Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl team. So, I mean, some positive things very much so that I take away from his experience in the past, but also, I'm not going to just let Brian Kelly stand up there and say, hey, he's got winning experience at the highest level and cite that as the reason why I should be confident that this defense is in good hands. I have no doubt that it probably is. I mean, Brian Kelly wouldn't bring in a defensive coordinator I don't think that he had the utmost confidence in. But I mean, I'm going to be completely honest. I just don't have a huge sample size here. I don't have a huge sample size of defensive coordinating at high levels in order to feel confident about that. But coming up next, what exactly does that defense look like? What exactly is the vision schematically that Brian Kelly and Matt House have for this Tigers team in 2022? We will hear what they have to say and what they have in mind for the X's and O's on defense. But before we do that, I got to remind y'all that let's not forget that while we've got a lot of football talk going on, while we've got some exciting offseason conversations surrounding the LSU Tigers this offseason, March Madness is only a few weeks away. That means that you need to start thinking now about where you're going to be running your brackets this year. Are you going for the usual? Or are you going for the best? We've done our homework here, and we are running the brackets with RunYourPool.com. Along with standard brackets, RunYourPool offers game types like Survivor or Pick X. They're both really fun in their own way. They're both a blast, and I totally recommend trying it out. They have options to edit scoring, and they offer more intel to make your picks. All stuff you won't find at ESPN or CBS. If you've got a business, Run Your Pool can help you take some of that madness, magic, and play alongside your employees or even gain customers. Plus, they offer full white glove customer support, custom branding, and one of the easiest 3-minute setups you will ever find. Clearly, We believe Run Your Pool because, like I said, we're running our brackets there ourselves. There's no truer test than that. If you want to play against us for a shot at a cash prize, join us at runyourpool.com/lockedon. And while you're there, create your own pool for your friends and family. Enter Pure Madness at checkout. That's code Pure Madness for $10 off your custom pool. All the rules and details will be available there. That's runyourpool.com/lockedon for your chance to win a cash prize. We look forward to seeing and hopefully beating you there. Thanks for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. Now, I teased it a little bit earlier on in the show, but I'm breaking down all of what we heard from Brian Kelly and Matt House and the entire defensive side of things today. But Brian Kelly also came back for a second day to break down the offense. So that's what we'll do tomorrow. So make sure to check out tomorrow's episode where we break down Brian Kelly's press conference and what this LSU offense looks like for the 2022 season. Also, we've got an LSU basketball game, an LSU baseball game on Wednesday as well. So we'll have all of those previews available for y'all tomorrow. So make sure to check those out as well. Now, I think the question that a lot of people have been wondering in this offseason, in Brian Kelly's silence over the past couple of months, what is this team going to look like? What is this defense going to look schematically in the Brian Kelly era? And my response to that is, wouldn't we all like to know? Wouldn't we all like to know that? Because although Brian Kelly held that press conference in order to introduce his coaching staff, in order to update us on what's going on behind the curtain with this team, they don't really know what this scheme is going to look like either. And if I can be completely honest with y'all, I'm okay with that. I'm totally fine with that. Brian Kelly and his staff, they're letting the personnel define what this defense looks like. They're playing off of their strength. They're playing off of this chemistry. This is what Brian Kelly and also Matt House had to say about what this defense is going to look like in the fall.
I think, from a defensive standpoint, I think offensive, minded coaches would all tell you that if you line up one way, you're going to have a long day. And so, we're going to defensively be able to give you multiple looks. Obviously, try to keep the personnel as constant as possible, and make it difficult, for offenses to know what they're going to get from down to down.
We're still learning our guys, and until you can learn your guys, football 101 is, right, accentuate the positive and try to keep them out of negative situations. As coaches and as a coaching staff, we got the experience and the versatility to put them in good situations. But there's a process of learning what your guys can do and what they can't do before you can execute that. And that's the process of going through this winter, going through spring ball. It's a process, and we'll kind of metamorphose into what we can become.
So that was head coach Brian Kelly and defensive coordinator Matt House. And they both kind of said along the lines of the same thing of, we don't really know what this defense schematically is going to what it's going to look like. We don't know if we're going to run a 4-3 or a 3-4. We don't know exactly what each down looks like. We don't know how we are going to plan to cover receivers or rush the quarterback. We don't know the specifics of that yet. But the two things that I took away from both of those comments, one, we don't know what it's going to look like, but we know that it's going to be dynamic. We don't know what it's going to look like, but we're going to do whatever we can to make things as simple as possible for our personnel, but make it look as complex as possible for opposing quarterbacks. We don't know what it's going to look like, but we're going to get this job done. The second part that I took away, mostly from Matt House, is that this defense is going to focus on the strengths of their individual players, which I really appreciate, because LSU kind of has a bad history of trying to fit square pegs in round holes. And what I mean by that is LSU coaches in the past may have had this idea of what scheme they want to run, whether that's on offense or on defense. They have an idea of what they want this offense to look like, but they don't necessarily have the players to execute it. It's a scheme that they're trying to fit players into. But what it seems like, both from Brian Kelly and Matt House's comments, are they don't have a scheme in mind to fit their players into. They're going to learn their players, and they're going to figure out their strengths, and they're going to figure out their weaknesses, and they're going to design a scheme based off of what their players do best. And like, while that seems quite obvious, that's something that LSU has had a problem with in the past. And that's something that has given LSU football some issues in the past of stop trying to be something that you're not. Stop trying to get these college players to fit into a scheme that they just don't necessarily fit into. Cater to your players' strengths. Learn your players, and don't stand up here, for example, today on March 1st and tell me this, we're running a 4-3 defense, and this is the corner that we want to line up with this certain wide receiver, and this is our exact vision down to each individual X and O of the defense. Why would you do that? I mean, you're making it more difficult for your players, and you're making it more difficult for yourself for, getting an idea in your head of what this team looks like, when in reality, these coaches don't know these players. These players don't know each other. These players have never played together before, because this defense is almost like a mod podge of these transfers and of these signees that they've picked up. I mean, if you look at it, you got a transfer on the defensive line, a Mizzou transfer, Mekhi Wingo. You got 3 transfer corners in Jarek Bernard-Converse out of Oklahoma State. You got Greg Brooks Jr. coming out of Arkansas. You got Mekhi Garner coming out of ULL. I mean, there's only one returning player on the secondary. I mean, this defense it really is almost feels like an island of misfit toys, and I don't mean that with any negative connotation by any means, but it's just players that Brian Kelly has collected both in the transfer portal and also kids coming out of high school, and they just got to figure out who they are, what their strengths are, how they play together. And you don't know that today on March 1st. You don't know what that's going to look like in September, October, and November. So while I would have loved more answers, and while I would have loved a little bit more of a peek behind the curtain of exactly what this defense will look like, what we can expect against Florida State come the fall, I'm really okay with Brian Kelly and Matt House and the rest of these defensive coaches for taking their time and taking a step back and saying, look, we don't know. We just do not know. We don't know these players. They don't know each other. We don't know what they can do, but we'll figure out a scheme based off of what they can do. Doesn't that make the most sense anyways? I'm cool with it. I know a lot of people have been frustrated that they just want answers, but you know what? We'll find our answers when it matters, and that's in September. But coming up next, although we don't know much about what the beginnings of the Brian Kelly era will look like, internally, we may have gotten a little bit of a peek of what this coaching staff will look like and Brian Kelly's philosophy as he captains the ship of LSU football. We'll get into that coming up next. But before we do that, I want to tell y'all about BetOnline. Football might be over for the season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. So put some money on it. From all of the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the #1 spot for all of your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds right to the Olympic coverage and information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Now, do we get a little bit of a peek behind the curtain of what is to come this season with Brian Kelly captaining the ship that is LSU football? Now, we learned in this last segment that we don't know what the X's and O's in the scheme of this defense is going to look like because they don't even know the players. They don't know what these players can do. They don't know how these players work together, and that's fine. So we're really not going to have a ton of answers here in February and March of what this team is going to look like because they don't even know. But what we can get a good idea for, a good feel for, of what the Brian Kelly era will look like, or at least the beginnings of the Brian Kelly era at LSU will look like, it's the interactions with the coaches. And it's the coaching staff that he put together and how things are going with the coaching staff, at least, because they can't get a good read on the players. But the coaching staff has been together for a few months now. Now, here is what Matt House had to say about his relationship with Brian Kelly and how things have been moving forward between himself and Brian Kelly.
I've learned in a short amount of time with Coach, whether it was through the process of conversations that ended up to me coming here or through the conversations we've had now, is he's going to empower people to do their job, whether it's a player, whether it's a coach, whether it's a nutritionist, okay? And the thing we're doing right now is more than putting the plan together. Right now we're trying to get our guys to buy in to the habits and the focus to do the things right day in and day out. So when we do get on the grass and execute the plan, we can be consistent in our execution.
I think that was such an underrated and so incredibly important aspect of Matt House's press conference. He said that Brian Kelly, at least the vibe that he's gotten so far in his time at LSU, is that Brian Kelly is going to let the people who he hired to do certain jobs do those jobs. And I think as an LSU fan, you've got to just breathe a sigh of relief when you hear that. Because let's take a look at the past, shall we? Les Miles, he was notorious for not being able to take his nose out of everything going on within the offense. He never let his offensive coordinator do what he needed to do. And we saw that in Les Miles' demise. Les Miles wanted his fingerprint on every single down, on every single play that was being called. Les Miles never let his coordinators and his coaches fully do what they wanted to do because he just couldn't butt out of anything that was going on. And we'll also take a look at Coach O. I've said it before and I will say it again. Coach O is not a great X's and O's coach. He's a great recruiter, he's a great motivator, and he's a great face for a team or a franchise. But he's not an X's and O's guy. He's not a coordinator. So what did he do? He let his coordinators do their jobs. He let Steven Ensminger and he let Joe Brady lead that offense. And you know what happened? They won a freaking national championship. That's what happens whenever you can understand your own strengths as a coach and you can trust the people who you hired to do their jobs. So when I heard Matt House say that about Brian Kelly, doesn't matter if it's Matt House, it doesn't matter if it's a trainer, it doesn't matter if it's a nutritionist, it doesn't matter if it's someone in the recruiting office. Those people have those jobs for a reason. And these coordinators are direct reflections of Brian Kelly himself. So doesn't he want them to do their jobs? Les Miles ultimately held his teams back because he just couldn't get his hands off the throat of the offense and let Matt Canada or whoever it was underneath Les Miles do their jobs. Coach O let his coordinators do their jobs. And if we can see, Dave Aranda's had a good bit of success doing his job. So I at least breathed such a sigh of relief when I heard Matt House saying that Brian Kelly is going to let his coordinators do the coordinating and he'll do the head coaching. And that's how it's supposed to be because that's what they were hired to do. Brian Kelly is the head coach. The coordinators are the coordinators. Do what you do and do what you were hired to do. So that was a big takeaway from me. Was Brian Kelly just saying, hey, I'll take a back seat because these are my guys and I will let them do what I hired them to do. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. Like I mentioned, tomorrow we will break down the offensive press conferences, some of my biggest takeaways from that, as well as previewing LSU basketball and LSU baseball as they take on their midweek games on Wednesday night. Now, make your second listen Locked On NFL Draft. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker bring the NFL draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It is free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Tiger fans, I'll see y'all tomorrow.